Again, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Victor Karkar. I'm one of the co-founders of Scrible, and we're here because, as many of you might know, we have been very fortunate to have a statewide contract with Utah for the current school year. And so we've been doing lots of trainings like this, both with your peers across the state in the library world, but also with teachers, secondary and some elementary as well across different disciplines. So really excited to work with you. And, we were basically asked to present as part of this event today, really to kind of provide, I think, an overview primarily. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of an overview. And then more importantly, I'm going to try to get through that relatively quickly so you can hear from one of your own, which is another, library media specialist, Rebecca Scott, who's on the call as well now. And Rebecca, again, is a high school librarian as well as an adjunct instructor at a community college in the Chicagoland area. So maybe I'll just pause for a minute and let Rebecca introduce herself and then hand it back to me so I can kind of show you what I've got to say.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and look forward to sharing my story with you. Yes, I've been a high school librarian for over 20 years, and a couple years ago started teaching at a community college for those who are interested in the library profession. So I get to teach my content. I tell my teachers now. So excited to be here and share the story with you.
Great. So what I'm going to do now, thanks, Rebecca. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. And before I do that, with folks that are who I can see who are sharing their video, if you can just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, and if you can see me okay, that'd be great. Okay, awesome. And I know people oftentimes say best practice on these such situations is to hide your video. You can certainly do that. There's no pressure to show yourself if you don't want to be seen. But I usually prefer seeing people's faces. So if you want to show yourself, please do. We'd love to have you. But let me share my screen and we can jump right in. All right, you all should see a slide that has the title of the session here, and it has the Utah State Board of Education logo on the top left. If you see that, give me a quick thumbs up. Great, awesome. So, I think in a different year, we would be talking about Scrible obviously a little bit differently, but it's 2020, and so we wanted to sort of provide the overview in the context of the pandemic. And so I'm going to kind of give you the overview that we would normally give, and I'll pepper in some comments about how I think we're particularly helpful right now because we're filling a gap in the distance learning model. But then Rebecca is also going to be talking about how we're helpful generally, but I think focus a little bit as well on how we're helping right now with her district and her schools with remote learning. So you'll definitely hear about that sort of practice and implementation from her. But let me give you the quick overview. And maybe just a quick question to kind of frame the conversation during this session. Maybe you can put this into the chat, but how many of you, were on the kickoff webinar that we did a couple weeks ago, or, have seen or know anything about us? So maybe if you could just put that into the chat, that'll be kind of helpful to know if you have some context or if you're starting from scratch, which is fine as well. So I'll just take a quick look at that and see if, okay, so I'm getting some folks that are saying you're starting as a newbie. Okay, all right, no problem. So it looks like we're going to be starting from scratch, which is kind of what I thought might be the case. So let me go ahead and kind of explain this from the ground up. So the problem that we've been addressing is that, as many of you know, about half the students in our country struggle with research skills and they're not ready for college level writing. It's a very well documented problem across the country. And it's something that we tend to focus on primarily in secondary, although we do have folks using us in late elementary as well. And you certainly have that opportunity through the statewide contract that we have, which is across all grades and subjects. The problem starts in K-12, but it continues on into colleges. Frankly, like the ones, like the one that Rebecca's teaching at as well, where community college instructors and even just, professors at four-year institutions complain about students not being well prepared in these areas when they come to them. And sadly, it doesn't necessarily get addressed there either. And so you have this eye-popping number from the National Commission on Writing on the amount of productivity lost every year due to bad writing in the business world. So it's a pretty pervasive problem. And when you talk to teachers, as we have across the country, and work with them, you hear this a lot, which is that frankly, part of the challenge around research and writing is it's extremely time consuming. Now, having kind of dissected the workflow and understood the problem from that perspective as we have, what we've seen is that students historically have lacked a single platform to help them kind of organize their work. And as a byproduct, teachers and librarians have not had a great sort of single place to go to be able to get visibility into the student progress as it's happening. So to be a little bit more specific, when you think about the research and writing process, which I'm sure all of you have thought about and have had to deal with over the years, it's a pretty complex and fragmented workflow, right? So historically, there've been all these different steps along the way, and teachers and librarians and students have had to, frankly, cobble together a bunch of different tools to do different parts of the workflow. So they might have used a standalone citation tool, a standalone PDF organizer, a standalone web clipper to grab things off the internet when you're doing research, and inevitably, it's all kind of got to get packaged into this nice final work product, which is essentially usually a Google Doc or Word doc. And the problem is that the way the work's always been done has been really fragmented, using this kind of multiple, a combination of multiple apps and even paper workflows in many places where, people are still printing articles out so they can annotate them by hand, or using physical note cards to write down quotes. And so it becomes hard for you all, as we've learned, and teachers to be able to sort of teach through this process and track students through this process. So our answer to that has really been to build Scrible as kind of like a super app, if you will, that lets you do all this work in one place. So we help students curate, annotate, cite, build an outline, build a bibliography. And then because we're integrated with and partnered with Google and Microsoft, we make it easy to bring your research into the writing process through a Google Docs add-on and a Microsoft Word add-in, which I'll show you quickly here in the overview. So ultimately help students sort of scaffold and stay organized through the process. But then we also have things for you all and for teachers where we're able to do a variety of things, and we're not going to go into all of these in detail now. But certainly the analytics piece is something that I'll mention, and then I think Rebecca has an example of that as well, where we're able to actually bring all the data from the workflow for this that the students are doing into a dashboard for each assignment, so that you all can see, along with the teachers that you might be co-teaching with, kind of where students are in real time as the work's actually happening. So it's the first real kind of comprehensive research and writing solution in this way, and it's meant to save you all and students time, but also really importantly, empower you and the teachers you're working with information, with data, real-time progress and data that helps you personalize the instruction to each student in a way that normally either wasn't possible because the data was never kind of collected and put in one place, or frankly was just really time consuming because you had to kind of, as we've heard, kind of herd cats and pull teeth to be able to get access to all the different parts of a paper or project. So we centralize all that and make it a lot easier to access that as well. So that's the high level. What I wanted to do quickly is actually give you some screenshots, kind of like a pseudo demo in slides here to kind of make it a little bit more tangible so you can see what the interfaces actually look like. And then, I'll come back up to 30,000 foot level. But let's take the example of a student, for example, that is writing a paper about space exploration. So, they're out there on the web doing their research and they come across an article like the one you see here that looks interesting. The student would click on our Scribble Chrome extension that you see here in the top right corner. We also have an extension for Edge for those folks that are using Microsoft out there. But let's say you're in a Google environment and you click on the Chrome extension here. Two things happen. First, this article gets saved to my Scribble library in the cloud, where it lives forever, even if the original goes offline. So that solves a classic problem in web-based research that we all know as link rot, where basically we have bookmarked a bunch of things in the browser as we're doing our research, and then we come back, a couple days, a couple weeks later, and you have got a bunch of broken links. So now you have to retrace all your steps and find that information again. So we kind of obviate that problem because we save a copy of the article forever, in your library for later reference. The second thing that happens when the student clicks on the Scribble Chrome extension is that we load this toolbar and some other things on top of the page, which allow the student to then richly annotate the article right in the browser. They can richly highlight, they can annotate the article to flag important passages they might want to quote right then and there. They can actually add comments in the comment sidebar to be thoughtful about the content that they're reading. You can see here that they can actually tag individual pieces of evidence or comments to help them organize their thoughts. And then if this is a shared article, they can actually reply to one another. If it's a group project or if a teacher and a student wanted to collaborate, you could have basically a discourse in the margin. There's other capabilities too, but in this overview, what I like to focus on is that we also basically embed citation extraction early into the research process. So what you're seeing here is that we have automatically extracted citation information from the article, and we've pre-filled a bunch of the fields down below that you would need for the properly formatted citation for this article, which is rendered in real time up top right here. Now, no citation tool that's ever been built, including all the ones you've used and heard of in the past, have ever been 100% perfect when it comes to forming the citation or extracting the right information, I should say, from web content. And the problem is the web is kind of the Wild West. Everybody doesn't follow the same rules. People don't necessarily always provide the metadata that services like ours need. So we always recommend, whether you're using our service or not, as a student, you should definitely sort of check the fields and make sure that everything is correct. And if you do need to make any changes, for example, if you need to add a second author that maybe wasn't automatically extracted, as you make those changes down below in the fields, you'll see the citation up top change in real time. So as students are typing down below, they'll see the citation up top change in real time. And so they can see the impact of their work. You'll see here that we, right now it's showing APA, but we default to MLA style, and we support all the different citation styles out there. All the work they're doing here, highlighting, replying to comments, editing citation fields, it's all getting auto-saved as they go. So it's like Google Docs in that way, where you don't have to worry so much about losing much if the browser crashes or the bandwidth chokes, which is more of a concern right now because a lot of students are working from home and you don't necessarily have consistent Wi-Fi connection everywhere across the state. So what's nice is that as it's getting auto-saved, it's basically going to what we call your Scribble library in the cloud. And you can get there either by going to our site and logging in with your credentials, or you can click on this little library button in the toolbar, which will open up a new browser tab and bring you right into your library. And the library actually looks a little bit different than this because we've made an update recently, but the general concept is still the same. And that is that the library is a place where your resources are saved, like the ones that you see here, but it's also a place where other work can be done. In terms of being able to sort of save your resources, I showed you an example of how you can use the Chrome extension to grab articles off the web. But I want to be clear that we're not just about web content. So for example, we've built a cloud-based PDF viewer and annotator that's sort of just baked into the system. And what that means is that if you happen to be on the open web and you come across a PDF, obviously it will load in the...
I'm signed in on 4 different devices.
I see some folks here asking if you're on the call and if you are not already muted, please mute your mic, or maybe that's something that Rebecca might be able to do as a co-host. Sorry for that interruption, but I just wanted to say that, we built this PDF viewer right into the system. So you don't have to use a separate PDF viewer when you're doing research. And what that means is that, let's say you're out on the web and you're doing research and you come across a PDF, all the browsers, and Chrome in particular, has a PDF viewer built in now, which means that when you click on that PDF, let's say instead of Google search results, it'll open in the browser. Well, when you do that, if you then click on our Chrome extension, it'll transfer that PDF to our viewer right then and there. It'll save it to your library, and then it's ready to annotate all with one click. The nice thing about that is that a lot of students are using Chromebooks these days. And so, Chromebooks are not known to have a lot of local storage. That's kind of, that's not the point on those kinds of devices. Everything's meant to be kind of in the cloud. Well, most of the research you're doing is sort of in the cloud as well. So the nice thing here is that if you click on the Chrome extension while you're doing research, even if you come across, content that's in file format, like a PDF, you can just click on that Chrome extension and then basically just sort of with one click curate those articles directly into the library without having to download and then upload them later. Now, if you do want to do that, if you do want to actually save a bunch of things to your desktop because maybe you're using a PC or a Mac, which do obviously have a lot of local storage, and maybe you're using those kinds of devices right now, we do allow you to do that. You can basically drag and drop files directly into your Scribble library in the browser, and we'll upload them to your account, and then they'll appear right here alongside anything you've curated using the Chrome extension. So bottom line is, there's multiple ways of getting stuff into the library, and it's not just about web content. We basically allow you to bring in other things as well from your desktop, like Word documents and images and things like that. We only annotate web pages and PDFs right now, but that will change in the future as we kind of grow our annotation capabilities to include things like image annotation. And what you'll notice is that anything that you add to the library, you can use tags to organize, like you see here, kind of like labels in Gmail. But if you're somebody who doesn't like to organize very much, and sometimes students don't, we allow you to be, a little bit lazy, I suppose, because we actually full text index all the content in the library. So you can do a simple keyword search right here in the search field. And actually now, after the change we made recently, the search field appears right here. We will full text search all the content of all the articles that you've added to the library and be able to show you just those articles that match that search result. Very familiar user experience for anybody that has essentially done searches in Gmail, for example. So that's how you kind of organize and find things. I'm not going to go into this in much detail, partly in the interest of time, since we don't have a lot of time together. But I will just mention that we've also built a number of other sort of downstream tools to help you essentially take this research and kind of mold it into the parts of the writing that you would need. So for example, under the bibliography tab, we have a bibliography editor where you can generate a works cited page really easily with a couple of clicks. We have an outline editor where you can literally drag and drop your notes and highlights from your research into a dynamic outline interface. And there's a lot of nifty things about it, but I think the thing that's most interesting is that because we helped you curate, annotate, and cite the articles early on, like I showed you on the last slide, then later when you're downstream in the writing process and you're creating your outline, you start bringing that evidence into the outline interface, we automatically know where it came from, and so we can update the bibliography kind of automatically in the background. And then under the Papers tab, we actually embed the Google Doc viewer so that you can see the paper that's associated with this assignment. Then if you want, you can go into full screen mode as well to see it in a normal view like you're used to seeing Google Docs. Bottom line is, the point of all this is that we kind of make everything centralized and accessible right here. So whether you're the student that's looking at all the different parts of your paper or project, or you're a teacher or a librarian who later is looking at what we call an assignment library for a particular assignment for a particular student, you can jump into a student's library and see all of their work just by clicking on these different tabs. So you can see their sources, their annotations, their bibliography, their outline, their paper, etc. Last thing I'll say here is that this is an example of one library for this one particular project or paper. With regard to the way that you all will be using Scribble, since you have kind of full access to everything that we offer, if you were to click on this little library tab on the left-hand side, you'd see a list slide out of all the different libraries that I, as the student in this case, have access to. And so as a student, I might have one for my science fair project, one for my English paper, one for my social studies paper, and so forth. And so you can have multiple libraries. Every library has an owner. That could be a student if they've created it. It could be a teacher or a librarian if they've created that on behalf of a group. And then it could also be a library that we call an assignment library that gets created as a byproduct of your creating a research project or paper assignment within our system. And so if you are creating a library as a student or as a teacher, and you're the owner of that library, you have the ability to invite other people to that library, kind of like you have the ability to invite people to a Google Doc that you own and created. And then you can, decide, give it a description. You can decide what kind of permissions people have in that library. So for example, if you're working with a younger age group, you might want to create a library and then invite the entire class, and that turns it into what we call a class library. And that class library could be a great place with the younger students to kind of help jumpstart the research process by seeding some of the early articles and research that you want them to use if you're not yet comfortable letting them go out to the web and kind of find things on their own. Another example of how you could use a class library would be, for example, like a reading list. So if you're working in a literacy context, which is another way that people use our platform, even though we tend to lead with research and writing, some people are using the annotation system for close reading and text analysis. You could basically be curating hot off the press content, right now that might be in the news related to the election or other kind of hot topics, and put them into a library that everybody in the class has access to for a group discussion or for, kind of a close reading exercise. So a lot of things you can do in the system, and you don't have to do them all. You don't have to feel, overwhelmed by them. But I'm just pointing out, some of the ways in which you can take advantage of the way the system is built for research, for writing, for sharing content, etc. All right. For those of you that are not familiar, Google Docs has this concept of add-ons, and Microsoft has a similar concept called add-ins. But basically the idea is it allows third-party developers like us to basically have a presence within their word processor. So in the Google world, again, it's called an add-on, and our add-on, as you can see here, is called Scribble Writer. And basically what we get is a sidebar within the interface that lets us have some presence here. And what we've done with that real estate that Google gives us is we've taken that library that we've been talking about, we've slimmed it down, and we've embedded it right here so that students have easy access to their research while they're writing their paper. So here I have my research on the right, and I can be writing my paper here on the left. So let's say that as a teacher, I've kind of, maybe the teacher has chunked the work, where in week 1, you know, the students are doing the research, in week 2, they're creating their outline, and in week 3, they're writing their paper. Well, when I come in as a student in week 3 to write my paper, I can call up the add-on, I can look at my sources, I can start hovering, I can start browsing through them. And as I hover over the different sources, I might see, for example, that you know, there's this one article that I saved and highlighted a couple of weeks ago that looks really interesting to me. And I don't remember why I saved it, but I can go one level deeper by clicking on this right arrow. When I do that, I'll be able to see all the notes and highlights that I made in that article. And as I hover over any one of those, I have some options, one of which is to insert that green highlighted text, for example, into the paper as a quote. So we will go, as Scribble, the system will go and basically grab that green highlighted text out of the student's library, drop it into the paper, put it in quotes, and insert an in-text parenthetical citation at the end. Now, when it comes to you know, doing this, it's easy to use kind of this browsing and navigating approach if you've looked at the stuff recently. If you haven't, you know, maybe if there's a lot of content or you looked at it a long time ago, search is a better way to do that. And so, you know, maybe I remember that I highlighted something about Mars a couple of weeks ago. I can actually type in Mars in the search field here, click search, and we will go and basically find all the places in those notes and highlights that you made in your library across all the different articles that have the word Mars in them. And as you can see here, the search term appears in this in turquoise highlighted text, in this green note, and so forth. And then again, as a student, I can insert that as a quote into the paper. Now, if for a moment you switch gears and think about this as the librarian or as the teacher, if you've got a lot of papers to grade and you come across a quote historically that has, you know, that looks like it's taken out of context or it's kind of fishy, it's normally tedious and some work to go kind of figure out where that came from and to see if that was taken out of context. In our world, if you just click on that in-text parenthetical citation, we will take you back to the student's library and open up that article to show you where that annotation was in its original context, so that you can sort of evaluate the, you know, the quality of that quote in the original context it was taken from. And then we also have the outline tab right here. So on the last slide, I talked about the outline editor, but I didn't actually show it to you. But in this example, if I, as a student, created the outline in week 2, then when I'm writing my paper in week 3, I can come in, I can pull up the outline, I can click on this insert link that you see here, and it'll insert the whole outline into the paper to help jumpstart the writing process. And the last piece here is the bibliography, which we, again, have been kind of automatically been updating as a byproduct of the student bringing their evidence into the outline or to the paper. And then we basically insert that and keep that up to date on the last page of the document. Now, I know we're in the weeds, but we're in the weeds because, frankly, that's where a lot of the pain and the time suck is. And I think our philosophy really is that we live in a time now where software can help automate a lot of the mundane stuff that we all have to suffer through. So if we can do that, our hope is really to try to shift students' time away from manual information processing so they can spend more of that time on the critical thinking aspects of the process, and you know, not focus on kind of all the copying and pasting, the other things that we've always had to do in this really process-intensive learning experience in the past. And our hope is that by freeing up that time, they can spend more time thinking about the quality of the sources, the structure of the paper, the validity of the evidence, those kinds of things that I think really matter more in the, you know, in terms of kind of sparking critical thinking. I'm gonna just probably end with this slide, so I have you know, enough time for Rebecca to kind of show you how this looks and works, you know, in the field for real. So this is an example of a research paper that's been assigned where, you know, we're able to show, for example, how many students are on target and off target for the different steps in the process. We can show you how many students are, you know, have started the research or not, started the paper or not, or met certain goals that were created when the assignment was created. And so as a teacher or librarian, I can quickly get a lay of the land and see where everybody is. And more importantly, I can see that maybe these 5 students haven't even started the research yet, and those are the folks I need to focus on. Similarly, we've got data at the individual student level. So we can show you, for example, that Jordan here has collected 6 articles. She's met the first goal of having 5 cited sources, on her way to meeting the second goal of having 1,000 words in the paper. Susan's a rock star because she's all in the green and she's already turned it in. Kara here still has a lot of work left to do, right? All things that would be good to know sooner rather than later so that you can help these students course correct before it gets too late in the game. And I think, as many of you know, that timeliness of feedback is really important in this process because these assignment types tend to be very long. days and weeks and months when you're working on a project or a paper. And so if you don't find out until late in the game that Kara hasn't done much work yet, there isn't oftentimes time left in the term to help her kind of quickly catch up and do a quality job at the end, or even to redo the whole thing from scratch. And so our goal is really to try to empower you all and the teachers you work with real-time data that can help you kind of keep the kids on track and help them course correct before it gets too late in the game. And then the other thing I'll mention is that this last column is a little bit different, and it's, I think, of particular value potentially and interest to you all, because it has a little bit to do with media literacy. We don't make big claims in that arena at the moment, but what we do is we try to give you some information that normally you oftentimes don't have early access to in this whole process. And so the way this works is that when students are saving their sources into Scribble, we're able to automatically bucket them into some major categories. And so if we were in the actual app and I was hovering over these different pie slices, you'd see that 2 of these articles come from government websites, one's a Wikipedia article, 2 are coming from academic websites, and so forth. And so at a glance, we can give you, at a high level, a quick sense of the credibility and diversity of sources students are using. And I think overall, the whole point of all this is that, we're able to kind of centralize all this and make it available to teachers and to librarians so that right now they can sort of do virtual check-ins and track progress from home during virtual and distance learning and hybrid learning. Whereas normally what we've seen, and I've been in classes doing observations when this has been the case, normally before COVID and outside of a pandemic, you would see students and teachers and librarians sitting side by side in class doing face-to-face meetings so that you all and the teachers could basically assess the work and provide feedback in those meetings. And obviously that's not possible now in many ways, in many cases. And so we feel like we're filling a gap in the distance learning model, where by centralizing all the work and making it possible to access that work and provide feedback remotely within the system, you can continue to help students continue to do the kind of work that they need to be good at in order to be prepared for later grades and for college, where they're going to be being asked to do a lot more of this kind of work. And so the last thing I'll sort of close with on this slide is that what you're seeing here is the analytics. What you're not seeing on the slide that's also available is the underlying work that we make available to students, because when you create an assignment in our system, we spawn what's called an assignment library for every student for that assignment in that class. And you as the librarian and the teacher who you're co-teaching with, I assume, would have access to each student's library to be able to jump in and see all of Kara's or Jordan's, I guess Kara hasn't done much yet, Jordan's articles, her annotations or outline, etc. And you have access to that from the beginning all the way until when it's handed in at the end. And so because you've got easier access to that work, you can provide formative feedback in a way that normally is much slower. So I've got more to say, but I feel like I'm going to actually cut some of that short and hand the mic to Rebecca. I'll just mention that for those of you that are interested, we can take this up during Q&A, or we can put a link into the blog, into the chat here that talks a little bit about some of this stuff. We are also used for close reading and text analysis, and the annotation system is basically why that is the case. But in January, we launched some new assistive features to help with text accessibility and comprehension. And while these features are not new in the world, you've seen these things in other systems, we get to combine them with annotation and everything else we've built. So we're able to provide some novel new user experiences that you haven't seen before. So I'm not going to go into that in detail here, but while Rebecca's presenting, I'm going to put a blog post link into the chat so that you can actually see how that's different in our system than you might have seen in other places. So with that, I'll apologize to Rebecca for eating into her time a little bit, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think she should be able to share her screen and pick up where I left off.
All right, sounds great. Let me make sure I have the right screen here.
Yeah,
it's always the biggest challenge.
And while you all are doing, while you're doing that, I'll just also mention that there is a website at a webpage at scribble.com/Utah, which I'll also put into the chat. That is kind of our landing page for everybody in Utah. It's got a recording of the webinar training that we did about 2 weeks ago. And it's got some other resources and help resources. That is a good central place to go for sort of starting questions or training and whatnot that we are doing specifically for Utah. So I'll put that into the chat as well, but let me give it back to Rebecca.
Okay, and hopefully you're seeing Remote Librarian Scribble story, correct? That's on the screen, Victor? Thumbs up. Yes. And Victor, if you could check the chat, there were a couple of questions in there. So
sure, I'll address those. But is everybody else seeing, I think I stopped sharing my screen. Everybody else seeing Rebecca's screen? Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, good. All right, so I want to take you through my story. A lot of what Victor said, I'll touch on. I was kind of scribbling notes to myself as he was talking to, just to make sure I touch on some of those things and give you like the in-person, on the ground kind of a perspective for some things he touched on. This is just my information page. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my email at the end as well if you have any questions going forward. Just a little background, my district in Illinois, we really like school districts. So my district has 2 schools, and they are both high schools. And so across the district, we have 7 librarians. So in my building, we have 3 librarians. We're very fortunate. And in the other building, it's a bit of a bigger school. They have 4 librarians. So that is really because we are always working with teachers, and the remote and hybrid situation has certainly not diminished our role at all. And a lot of that is from providing those opportunities for teachers with things like Scribble and really becoming a co-teacher alongside them. So just a little information on that piece. What I'm going to share with you today is why I'm succeeding as a remote librarian and how Scribble has made that possible. I became interested in virtual librarianship in around 2016. I had the opportunity to take a year's leave of absence and go out to Arizona, where I worked at Grand Canyon University, which was mainly virtual. And it was chat and email and phone calls. And it was just a whole different type of librarianship from what I had been used to. So when I came back to Illinois, I said, wow, this is really coming. We need to be ready for this. And I started working toward creating a blended learning class for teachers, which was supposed to be in place this fall. But everyone suddenly became a virtual teacher in last spring. So things have changed for us in some ways in that realm. But also another thing that happened around that same time, 2017-ish, was I went to the AASL conference in Phoenix and I saw Scribble. And it truly stopped me in my tracks, because it was when Victor was showing you all of that, where they would highlight the articles. I was everything that I had wanted to have for my students, because he was so correct when he said we cobbled together all of these pieces for students, and Scribble finally gave us one place to have everything. We used to take an entire class period setting kids up just to save articles. And I can't tell you the joy on the teacher's faces when it took maybe 5-10 minutes. So it is true that Scribble allows for that critical thinking focus rather than the tool. So let's keep going here. All right, so my belief about successful remote librarianship, there's 3 components. They're kind of a spectrum, if you will. So let me show you the next screen. So it would be, are you ready to create a remote or hybrid library? Are you ready to teach as a hybrid or remote librarian? Or are you ready to coach your peers? And feel free, if you want to share where you feel you fall on that spectrum, you can share that in the chat. I think a lot of people are probably further along than they think they might be. And Scribble really helps in each of those components. And it definitely has turned us into that co-teacher, coach kind of a partner with our teachers too, because you can really have conversations about how you're revamping, reworking lessons and incorporating that research and those critical thinking skills. So it's been a great tool for that. All right, so let's start with that, creating a remote library. Okay, so that's kind of the, we all have really kind of done this, right? Those Bitmoji libraries are a big deal right now. Yes, we do have one at my school. We created one. And notice on our page, one of our stars is Scribble, okay? Because we train our kids, that's where you go to get started. And I will try to link to this on my webpage. We'll see if it works. So this is our Scribble page. We have a whole page dedicated to Scribble. And we have lots of tutorials. So we're always making our tutorials. Video tutorials are big. We have the step-by-step. We have how do you cite. When Victor talked about citing, citations in Scribble, I love teaching citation in Scribble because kids like to have something to start with. And so I have these format guides and I teach them, okay, you need to take a look and see what Scribble gave you. And I said, Scribble does a really good job, but it's not perfect. You need to check what that format looks like and then make the corrections. And I'll show you later how I used that with our AP US History kids. But it is a great way for them to have a start and then compare and know exactly what they need to add in order to create a perfect citation. So it's my favorite way to teach citations. So lots of links here. A tutorial. I have a librarian I work with at our sister school, and she creates the most amazing tutorials. I am giving you 5 pages of her 32-slide tutorial for her teachers. And this is incredible. So she would give this to the teachers. This would be the class it would be for. She loves to create her videos. So she's got a video about how to use Scribble. She's got links for how to use Scribble. She's got step-by-step for how to use Scribble and on each component of it. And so she gives this to the teachers, and then they can pick and choose whatever they want from that slide presentation that they give then to their students. So this is a great way that you can create that virtual library with those resources and then allow your teachers to personalize them for their use. So I just think her tutorial here was a great example of how you can, how Scribble is helping you move forward with your program. All right, so that's that. So let's talk about that teaching and coaching as a remote librarian. Okay, so I put this together on one slide because really they are aligned. And as you work to teach those classes, hopefully you're collaborating with your teachers too, and then you can begin to become kind of an instructional coach for them, helping them learn to use Scribble, helping them to incorporate that with their students. And we've had great success with that. And it's a great way to also, as I've said, move your program forward and really become that instructional partner. And so so I'm just going to walk you through how we work with our teachers. Okay. So when teachers want to work with us, and I will say, you know, years ago when my school went one-to-one and gave all the students Chromebooks, you know, the people said, oh, maybe we don't need librarians anymore. Well, that was not the case. We became the biggest advocates, became the loudest cheerleaders, and we left the library. We said, hey, if the computers aren't going to be in the library, the librarians can go into the classrooms. So we're rarely in the library, physical library at all for the last few years. And so now that's just become, now we're on Zoom. So when we prepare for those, so the teachers really don't schedule library time anymore. They schedule a librarian. So we schedule meetings with them, of course, via Zoom. And we've been revamping lessons. You know, this situation, the change between fully remote to hybrid. Right now we're hybrid. We may be fully remote. You know, it's day to day. So we've been revamping lessons with them. And then we create our Scribble assignments. And the teachers have become so good at doing this on their own. It's really been impressive that the more we've worked with them and taught them, and now they're embracing it on their own too, which is fine because sometimes they need us completely, sometimes just for a little while, and sometimes they're okay on their own. So let me see what I've got here. All right, so when we're working with our teachers, the first thing you need to do if you're going to help them create a Scribble assignment is they need to add you as a co-teacher in Google Classroom if you're using Google Classroom. You can also create, we've done this before where we've created just an assignment or a class and then students join with a code. But since we're a Google school, it just works out better to create that as in Classroom. So as you can see, I'm co-teacher for a lot of classes. The ones I want to show you for this presentation are the two that I've circled at the bottom. And these are small classes of 6 to 10 students, struggling learners, and this teacher has done an amazing job with them, and they're sophomores. And so we were working on their sophomore argumentative research paper. So let me take you through this journey. All right, so we start out, we sync the class with Scribble. And what's nice about this is once I'm as the co-teacher, if I need to, I can update it, I can sync the class, I can help the teacher. So the teacher doesn't have to be the only one doing this, I can help them as well. And I always say, I like needy teachers. Okay, I don't have a problem if the teacher needs me to do their work for them in some regards, because I know that they will eventually be able to move forward on their own. But that gives me that in with them as well. So we sync our classes, and then we create an assignment. This is also a great way to interact with the teachers, because when they're creating their assignment, if they're creating it with me, I can suggest, okay, well, you should probably have them looking at database articles, not just searching on the internet, and, you know, at least 3 sources of information. So you have input then as they're creating this assignment. And we talk about, should it be an annotated bibliography? Should it be a paper? Should it be a project? And because Scribble allows different types of assignments to be made. So what's the value of each? What is the goal of the assignment? So you can have a really rich conversation with your teachers. And then view progress, my favorite button of all. This is where we go in and see what the kids are doing, what their work looks like. And I actually show this to the students now that we're in a remote situation. I share my screen with them and I show them, this is what it's going to look like. This is what I can see. And so when I'm working with students, we begin by setting up Scribble and getting them to access that assignment that the teacher just created. And then I'll show you how we work with the articles in Scribble, and then also how I communicate with them. So here's, as I said, we Scribble, Scribble, Scribble. We have access all over the place. And so we have a tab for it on our library page. We embed it in our learning targets. And that makes it very clear to the students the importance of this. And again, I showed you earlier all of our tutorials. So we have many tutorials. This was the analytics that Victor showed you earlier. So this is from that small class that I was sharing with you of 6 students. And what I like about this is we are now teaching in 80-minute blocks. Okay, we used to have 50-minute periods, but now with our hybrid remote situation, we have 4 periods a day, 80-minute blocks. And so a lot of that is, you know, we provide instruction and then there's a lot of work time. Teachers have been, and this teacher in particular gave each student their own breakout room because she had a small class. And then I would pop into whichever breakout room was needed, where I was needed, and I was able to work with the students. So I could say to the teacher, oh, I see this student doesn't have any articles yet, hop into that breakout room. The student then was able to share their screen with me, and I was able to walk them through things. And some kids, of course, didn't pay attention during instruction perhaps, and so they needed me to help them walk through Scribble again. And so that's not a problem, or accessing the databases, not a problem. That's what made that breakout room so great. And I have to say, it really works out almost better than an in-person situation, because kids can be embarrassed if you're sitting next to them or walking over to them. So this way, we're in a breakout room, no one else is there, and they're very willing to share their screens with me. Okay, so here's what the class looked like. Now, we talked a little bit about that metrics. We teach source differentiation, or we want kids to have a variety of sources. And this is something we really push with our juniors, but it's a great way for all levels where I can show them, look, you have a variety of types of sources. This is great. And then they become curious about it and they want to know. And it can become kind of a competition then. If somebody has only one color, like, what's wrong with that kid? But it's a great way to even just give them a visual of the importance of different types of sources. So I like the metrics quite a lot. And you can see again here, we had students, some who were much further along than others. I wanted to take you into this particular student's library. I did cover up the kids' names for privacy, but we'll go into this student's library just so you can see what it looks like, and then I'll talk you through how I work with them. This kid did great. She has lots and lots of sources in here. So that was a bonus. Something over at the top left side of the screen, there's a place you can type feedback. I have used that in the past, but I've been screencasting this year instead, which I've had really good results with. So I have used the feedback for them, which shows up right here, but I also have begun to just record myself. And then over here is viewing the student library. That's where I can go into their library and I can actually not just see it, I can interact with it. So for example, this is my example of what is and I'm sorry, my thing keeps showing up here. Let's see if I can move that. Here we go. So within the library, okay, I'm on the sources tab right now. And what happens sometimes is I'll go, and this is a pretty good list of articles, but if I'm going in there and they need both sides of an argument, or I see there's too many websites or something, I can actually provide a link to them. So the Scribble has that bookmark feature. And what I'll do sometimes is if they're off on a wrong track or they need some more links, I will link to just a list of database articles or a particular database article. And this one I called links, but I usually name it Links from Mrs. Scott. And then the kids will go in there, find the source they're going to use, and then they use the extension, which we actually call the Scribble square. So we tell them to scribble it or click the Scribble square, and that adds it into their library. And what's a fun story for you. So because the kids are really embracing the ease of the annotations in Scribble, I had a kid the other night, like, Mrs. Scott, I can't find my site. He's texting me or emailing me, excuse me. And he's saying, I can't find my annotations. And one of the other libraries was, this kid can't find his annotations. Well, it's because he had a whole nother page of annotations. And so that we were so excited because what kid has, 97 annotations, interactions with that document, and they can just spend more time in those articles to really understand what they're researching. And this is just an example of an article that a student highlighted. And I see we're running out of time, so I'm going to speed through and give you some tips for success as a remote librarian working with Scribble. As I said, those links are fantastic. Use that. Screencast, that's what I've been doing for my citations. So I go into Scribble and here's the citations, and I can walk the kids through exactly what they need to do to make those improvements. I have office hours from 7:30 to 9 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So the teachers put that into their Google Classroom, and kids reach out to me. And again, I can have them share their screen with me. We can walk through any issues they're having. And I can bring up their Scribble library. They can bring up their Scribble library. Here's a fun one. We also provide chat with our students. So again, if a student missed the instruction, we have those tutorials and we can provide that information to them. We also set up Zoom meetings. So as I've said, kids can share their screen. It's a great way to work with them. Just a couple of quotes to inspire you from one of our freshman students. And then our teacher, who had a lot to say. I asked her this morning, I said, hey, do you have anything to say about Scribble? She loved it. She said it just is the best. And she has really embraced it. She uses it. She's one of my stars as far as Scribble goes, and just really enjoy promoting this and working with our students and really enhancing the work we can do as librarians because of Scribble. Well, thank you, everyone. And I will stop sharing my screen now in case anyone has some questions.
Thanks, Rebecca. Sorry to have you squeeze there at the end. I know I ran into your time a little bit. I appreciate it. But I think we'll make the slide deck available as well, if you're okay with that, through the Canvas course listing that we've been asked to put the recording in as well. So we have a couple minutes. I think we've answered a lot of questions actually in the chat. I did a bit of that just now. But if anybody else has questions that they want to unmute themselves and ask so that we can actually hear your wonderful voices, that's fine. Or any feedback as well. If you have any thoughts or reactions, we'd love to hear that as well.
Well, I think that this would be great. My school only has 72 students, and I'm only the librarian there 2 hours a day, but I interact a lot with the literacy coach and the English teacher. So I think that this is something that I can share with them and get them on board with.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Great.
and the more you use it, the more you learn. It's amazing to me. There's a lot there, so you can start out small, and it's really incredible. It just gets better all the time.
Yeah, and for those of you that do work with literacy coaches, who also maybe also work with special ed and ELL, I'm putting into the chat right now the blog post that I promised earlier that has a link to, that basically talks about our new assistive features. So you can take a look at that. That might be useful for you to share internally with literacy folks, with special ed, ELL, maybe even foreign language. And for those of you also that look at this and feel like, wow, there's a lot here. I'm like, my brain is full. I'm going to tell you, as I said earlier, I think in the chat, you don't have to feel obligated to use everything. It's not a sort of, eat the whole enchilada right now kind of a situation. You can just take parts that you want when you want for what you need. If you look at our homepage, there's a video. It's a kind of a lengthy demo and teacher testimonial video. But about 4 minutes in, there's a video that's about 30 seconds from Matt Menschner, who's a social studies teacher that we work with in Philadelphia. And what he does is he basically, will take just the annotation features to help students learn about close reading and text analysis. Then he'll use just the commenting functionality to help kids learn how to practice paraphrasing, and then just the citation tools for that aspect. And basically he's scaffolding them up to actually doing a big project in second semester. The system is built loosely, not rigidly, so we don't force you to kind of go through things that you don't need or want necessarily. And so you can just take what you need when you want, and don't feel like you've got to be overwhelmed because there's so much there. And if you do need some help on how to use our stuff, I'm putting a chat in the chat. I'm putting a link to a blog post that talks about some of our self-help on-demand resources. Those are also linked to from the bottom of the scribble.com/Utah page that was shared earlier in the chat.
And that's true. I have a teacher next week who will be using the outlining, and I haven't done that yet. And it's a great way, again, to hit different content areas, different teachers, different grade levels, using Scribble for all of them, but in different ways.
Any final questions or comments?
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank Rebecca for taking time out. She is not paid to say any of this stuff. She's saying it because she really likes our stuff. We don't employ her.
I want a t-shirt. I just want a t-shirt.
Okay, we'll work on that. I think you've more than earned a t-shirt, and we should probably get on that. But thank you, Rebecca, so much for spending time and taking time out of your normal teaching duties today to help folks in Utah understand how they can make the most of this resource that they have now. there's some questions here about making this stuff available. Yes, so we'll make the recording as well as my slides and her slides available. I think Chris has recommended we put that into the Canvas page. That's the class for this session. So we'll add that in there so you have access to it for later. And if you need to, ask any questions, I promise it's not a black hole. You can email help@scribble.com, and it gets broader distribution than trying to reach me personally. And so we'll be able to get back to you.
And I will say that too. They are incredibly responsive. So yes, if you send that out, you will get an answer. It's fabulous. That's one of the best features about Scribble.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
have a great day
Victor.
and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome.